The Nigerian economy seems to be synonymous with fuel scarcity. It does not seem to matter which regime is in charge. Every couple of years, or in some cases months, the problem of fuel scarcity rears its ugly head. Now, every regime follows a typical playbook in dealing with the scarcity, sympathize with Nigerians and talk about how they shouldn't be wasting useful hours queuing for fuel, talk about how marketers, smugglers, and various middlemen are sabotaging the economy for their own selfish interests, promise to revamp the refineries, pay off marketers so they can settle their debts, import new products and flood the market with fuel with the hopes that it makes the scarcity go away. Now, in all this, the question is fuel scarcity the problem, or is it just a symptom of the problem? Now, we have in the studio a public affairs analyst, Majid Dahiru, to help us with some answers. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on DAYBREAK.
Thank you for having me today.
All right, so let's begin with the question. So is fuel scarcity the problem? Because a lot of people are complaining and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. So is fuel scarcity the problem, or is it a symptom of the problem?
It is a problem, but it's not the main problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. And that problem is Nigeria's inability to guarantee energy security for its citizens. So the problem of fuel queues and petroleum scarcity is symptomatic of Nigeria's deep-seated ailment of energy insecurity, an acute one at that. And I'm happy in your intro, you actually described energy security without necessarily using the term. And so that should be the focus of conversations around fuel queues that are perennial in Nigeria and seems to be unending, year in, year out.
Very interesting. Well, just yesterday, I was on the queue, and then you can't even access the fuel at all. Initially, we heard that it was the Kogi floods, and they were unable to move, fuel into, cities. And now I think that is drying out. But it still seems to linger. What really is the problem?
Well, the latest information we're getting is from the Group Chief Executive Officer of the NNPC Limited, Malam Mele Kiari. Sometime during the week, he actually made some revelations about the fact that the current landing cost of imported PMS has made the approved price of 170 naira a litre unrealistic because of the prevailing pricing condition in the international market of crude oil, and of course Nigeria being an import-dependent country on petroleum needs. He's simply saying that, look, what we have for subsidies, which is already almost tanking our physical condition, is no longer able to sustain the price of PMS at the rate of 170 naira per litre. And some people have said, look, the landing cost is as high as 450 naira at the moment. And so the threshold for subsidy has increased, meaning that we have to spend more money to cover up this additional cost if we must continue to have petrol at 170 naira per litre. So in essence, it is the pricing regime that is causing the disruption in supply. Now, the problem is NNPC did not offer any solution in the immediate. It's like it was a hanging statement. The pricing regime currently in existence at the rate of 170 naira per litre is no longer realistic. We've not seen any further pronouncement on the way out of the current circumstance, even as scarcity worsens. So marketers are telling you that, look, we cannot get this product at a certain price and sell below par because nobody will bear the costs. So we are like in a situation that is hanging between the decision on what next to do and how to get us out of the current situation arising from the unrealistic price, according to the operators of the market, of 170 naira per litre. So in essence, somebody is trying to fly a kite to say, look, we may need to increase the price in order to transfer the burden of this additional cost arising from the prevailing international market oil price on the end users, you and I. And so that conversation is going on. But of course, people are aware too, particularly those in government, that any marginal increase in the cost of petrol, the reaction from Nigerians might not be very palatable. So it's like a dicey situation for both the government and the people. And this is an election a year preceding the general elections, and so somehow people don't want to risk the wrath of the people. So it's a mix of politics and economics as we speak, so we don't know which one will actually prevail. Is it politics or the economics of oil pricing that will prevail?
Okay, so, just to add to what you said, Daily Trust carried a story on the 9th of November of the National Operations Controller of the Independent Petroleum Actors Association of Nigeria, saying that the only realistic pump price of petrol is 200 naira. Now, if, this particular increase in fuel, prevails, doesn't it put too much burden on the citizens, the Nigerians themselves, like actually the masses?
No, of course. And let me say this, and it's important to put this in perspective. Petrol, diesel, and other crude oil derivatives, as well as electricity, cumulatively are known as energy products. These are the products that keep your industries running, your homes, your mobility, your everything you think of. These are the commodities or the products that keep you running, that keeps an economy running. And so all over the world, governments are very, very careful in managing this product because they constitute energy, the energy you need to power your homes and drive your industries and also move your logistics. So it's like the most important item on the agenda of any government, energy. And securing energy, it has two components. Energy security has two components. It has to be available and affordable. If it's available and it's not affordable, you cannot say you have energy security. If it's also affordable and not available, you can't also say you have energy security. So both must go hand in hand for you to be able to guarantee that you have energy security for your country. Unfortunately, in the case of Nigeria, it is both unaffordable and unavailable. If you consider the condition we live in, consider our minimum wage, consider our earnings as a people, you would agree with me that even the current price is unaffordable, and at the same time, the scarcity also makes it unavailable. So Nigeria is suffering acute energy crisis, acute energy insecurity. So the focus is, how do we guarantee energy security for Nigeria so that we will not have such problems arising in the future? And unfortunately, this is 1999 at least, since we transited from military to civil democratic rule. It's as though we've not been able to find a solution to this problem. So it's been there in varying degrees. Well, some administrations manage it better than the others, but it's just been there. And back to your question, any marginal increase in the price of energy, including PMS, for example, is going to have a destabilizing effect on the economy. In fact, according to the NBS data, one of the major causes of inflation in Nigeria is actually the cost of energy. Because if you look at PMS, for example, PMS is the live wire of SMEs in Nigeria. It is the live wire of our homes because due to the epileptic power supply, we all rely on generating sets that run on PMS to power our homes and run our small and medium scale enterprises. So any marginal cost in the price, any marginal increase in the price of energy, or particularly PMS, a producer of any goods and service will actually have to now put that additional cost on the price of the end product for you, the end consumer, to bear. So it adds to what you call cost push inflation, because the cost of production itself has risen because of the input you need to produce the goods and services that you actually engage in as an entrepreneur. So it's not something we need to overemphasize. It is going to have a destabilizing effect as the past increases have done in the country. In fact, Nigeria went down the ignominious road of high inflation from 9.8% it was in 2015 to double digit, and it has kept increasing up until we're almost crossing the 20% mark because of the first increase in petroleum price in 2016 from 87 naira to 145 naira. It had an instant effect by way of increased inflation, and since then we've not recovered from it. So any marginal increase today will also continue that trajectory, and it is not good for the overall economy. You look at the cost of diesel, for example. You know what diesel is doing to manufacturers today, the high cost of diesel. In fact, high cost of diesel is not only affecting manufacturers, it's actually affecting the retail of petroleum, because most service stations use diesel to power their generating sets in order to operate their filling stations, their fueling stations. Now, the cost of diesel itself is also affecting the cost of production of these goods and services. Meaning that apart from the cost of the landing costs and even foreign exchange differentials, the cost of diesel alone, just one item, is capable of sending the price of PMS continuously on the increase if you don't control the price of diesel. So it's like an open-ended situation that leads nowhere. And I've listened to experts, I've listened to those in government, I've listened to those that are trying to come into government. I've not seen any plan, I've not seen any roadmap towards energy security in Nigeria that is realistic. I've not seen any. They are still regurgitating what has been said, like you said in your opening intro, over and over since 1999.
But some have actually talked about removal of fuel subsidy, helping, in the whole crisis.
Sometimes it's very sad that the problem of energy crisis has been reduced to subsidy. You see, I've heard people say subsidy of petroleum is subsidizing consumption, and that is a waste. Nothing can be more fallacious. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Subsidizing PMS, on the contrary, is subsidizing production because you need PMS to run your businesses. It is part of production. So when the cost of PMS is at a certain level, it makes the output from my production a little bit affordable to Nigerian people. And once you increase the price of PMS, I will increase the cost of my services as an entrepreneur. And so the problem is not subsidy. And I disagree with anybody who says subsidy is the problem. No. The problem is the corruption in the subsidy, one. And secondly, the fact that Nigeria, an oil-producing country like Nigeria, has to depend on importation of petroleum products. That is the major issue. Why are we not able to refine petroleum at home? And what's anybody doing about getting Nigeria to begin to refine its domestic need for petroleum at home as an oil-producing country? So that the question of landing costs, foreign exchange differentials will not even arise in the first place. And let me put this point straight. All over the world, from America to the UK, to France, to Saudi Arabia, to China, energy is subsidized as a matter of national security priority. All over the world, energy enjoys subsidy of government. And the reason is that energy is the foundation of the economy. So government has a strategic goal of keeping energy security in place through availability and affordability. And so whenever there is an imminent increase in price of energy, governments, responsible governments all over the world, put in place measures to lower the cost so that the economy will not tank, as Nigeria's economy is about to happen now, so that inflation will be kept under control, so that the cost of living, because the primary purpose of government is welfare and security, so that the cost of living of citizens will be kept under control and not be allowed to go beyond their reach and inflict hardship on the people. And I'll give you an example. Recently in the UK, they experienced cost of living crisis arising from high energy costs because of the disruptions of supply chains arising from the Russia-Ukraine war. And because most countries in Europe depend on oil-producing countries like Russia for their sources of energy, UK, of course, with the sanctions and all of the measures put in place to deter Russia from aggression in Ukraine, had an adverse effect because Russia is now weaponizing its own energy, infrastructure to actually press home its own foreign policy agenda. And so UK was actually badly hit. The government of UK today, beginning from Liz Truss, who just left as Prime Minister, had to put in place what was known as energy price cap. And what's energy price cap? Subsidy of electricity bills and cooking gas. Because as they go into the winter, it's expected that there will be an increase, further increase in the price of energy. That will destabilize the entire economy. And so the UK had to roll out a package of over $100 billion to subsidize electricity and cooking gas for UK citizens, in addition to supporting businesses that are also suffering high cost of production arising from high energy costs. In the United States of America, the headquarters of capitalism, they have what is called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It was created in 1973. Why? Because of disruptions in energy supplies, because of the Arab-Israeli war, following which the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia imposed an embargo on the West. And so it caused a lot of hardship in the US. We were long fuel queues at very exorbitant prices. It was then that the United States government realized that they needed to have some level of government control over energy supply in the country, and they established the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That reserve has the capacity to hold 750 million liters of crude oil. And so from time to time, whenever there is an increase in the price of international price of crude oil, and which will also translate to increase in price of PMS at home in the US, the United States government releases from government stock to producers to bring down the price of PMS. As the US is going into the winter, and with the expectation that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is going to cut production of crude oil, which might send the price higher than in the current level, the US President Joe Biden, has signed an executive order to release 15 million barrels of crude from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve into the markets to cushion the effect of expected increases in prices. This is what every government does. Saudi Arabia itself, as an oil producing country, spends billions of dollars to subsidize electricity and PMS for its citizens. It's a responsibility of government. You see, nobody should actually blackmail Nigerians about subsidy. It is the responsibility of government to create wealth, resources enough to cater for our welfare and our security. However, the problem, like I said earlier, is not about subsidy. It is the fact that the Nigerian government has not been able to put in place measures to guarantee energy security in Nigeria. And this brings me back to the economic philosophy that is operational in Nigeria, at least since 1999. And we need to change it as soon as possible. And what is this economic philosophy? We have this neoliberal tendency that says government has no business in business, and have faulted this fallacious economic policy or philosophy since 1999 consistently. Government has business in business, and the only business of government is doing business. And any government that cannot do business has no business being a government. And the most fundamental business that government must undertake is the business of energy security. There's no country in the world whose government is not fully involved in one way or the other in the production of energy resources. There's no country in the world. And so what we have in Nigeria is that this tendency of government abdicating its responsibility in the midst of production, particularly energy, to the so-called private sector. And so the NNPC is a behemoth that is simply big for nothing, relying on JVs with private companies to extract, exploit, and export crude, and is unable to fix its own refining capabilities to guarantee for us our domestic need for refined products.
Exactly.
And that is because government is dilly-dally. The government is not committed to fixing its own processes enough and repositioning to take up the responsibility, its own responsibility of energy security. And let me emphasize this. There's no private sector initiative that can guarantee energy security except government. Government itself comes in. And so the solution to this problem is for government to carry out fundamental reforms in NNPC and Petroleum Ministry. Enough reform that will see government operations run in line with international best practices and the most sanitized corporate governance code in such a way that can enable it reposition its facilities, refurbish its refineries, build more, and allow government now to go into the real business of energy production. However, I must also mention that this is not the responsibility of federal government alone. It is also sad that Nigeria is endowed with hydrocarbon resources across states of the Niger Delta, for example. And yet, there is no state-owned enterprise across the entire length and breadth of Niger Delta, from rivers to Akwa Ibom, from Delta to Edo, to Ondo, and recently even Kogi. There is no oil-producing state in Nigeria which has been able to put in place one single state-owned refinery since 1999. So we must set an agenda for the incoming administration at all levels that the states that are endowed with hydrocarbon resources must take the lead in driving investments. It could be in partnership with private sector, there's no doubt about that, but government must be sitting on the driver's seat in providing the infrastructure that will enable the conversion of hydrocarbons to finished products. We cannot be sitting on these huge hydrocarbon reserves and be complaining of fuel queues in Nigeria. It is not normal, and we cannot normalize abnormality. So in essence, all hands, all tiers of government and all the hands must be on deck to fashion out a way out for us to attain energy security. It is not right that Nigeria is the only OPEC country that imports its petroleum needs. It is not right.
Absolutely.
Every other country has measures in place. And like I emphasized earlier, please, government has business doing business. Because its only business is to do business.
Absolutely.
Saudi Aramco is a state-owned enterprise. State-owned. Owned by the government of Saudi Arabia. It's a public enterprise. Yet, Saudi has a market capitalization of over $2 trillion.
I think I'm going to hold you there. Let's quickly join our reporter from Lagos, Abdul Latif Ali, for an update on the fuel situation there in Lagos, and then I'll get right back to you. Hello, Abdul Latif. Good morning and welcome to Daybreak.
Yeah, good morning.
So could you give us
Thank you for having me.
what's happening in regards to the fuel situation in Lagos at the moment?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, and thanks for having me. The situation in Lagos is still, we want to say that it's presently improving. We see that most of the major filling stations are currently dispensing fuel, and it's only very few of them that are not dispensing at the moment. And just a few minutes after I left my house, I passed through 3 different filling stations, 2 belonging to the NMPC and 1 other major marketer. So the 2 of the filling stations are actually dispensing, except the major marketer, which is not dispensing at the moment. So as far as we are concerned in Lagos, the situation seems to be improving, and the motorists, both the private and commercial motorists, are sure of getting fuel at least at some of the filling stations that we have in Lagos. And when you look at it, just few of them that have long queues. Like for instance, day before yesterday, I went into a filling station where I filled my tank, and so on. A lot of motorists are also saying the same thing, that the situation seems to be improving in Lagos.
Okay, Abdul, now reports actually have it that, fuel or petrol sells for 200 naira in Lagos and Ogun states. How true is that?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to most of the independent filling station marketers who are not major filling stations, yeah, they sell far above the normal threshold. Some of them 200 naira, some of them 210 naira. But what is very clear is that the major filling stations in Lagos, the one owned by Moman, the major marketer association of Nigeria, and the DAPMAN, which is the Depot and Petroleum Products Marketers Association of Nigeria, they are selling at the normal price. And this was actually emphasized a few days ago when there was a briefing on the fuel situation by DAPMA, and through its chairman, Mrs. Winifred Apani, who said that you will never see any of the filling stations owned by DAPMA or MoMA selling at 200 naira or 210 naira, despite also having the same challenges of having to source for forex at the black market and so on. But when you go to the interlands, like for instance, the border communities in between Lagos and Ogun State, in fact, some of the filling stations, 210 naira, 205, and 200 naira, and that is exactly what we're experiencing.
Well, thank you so much, Abdul Latif, for that update from Lagos. We hope to join you for more deliberations in the future.
All right, thank you.
All right, let me come back to you now. You know, the question that everybody is asking is, why can't we get our refineries running? What really is the problem, or are we doing something wrong?
Corruption. We're doing everything wrong. Corruption, inefficiency, and most importantly, an unwillingness to get it to work. Like I said earlier, we've been run with this neoliberal concept that government has no role in the means of production, particularly in energy. So what you say is a half-hearted measure by even the current government in trying to strike a balance between government responsibility towards energy security and allowing private sector to actually take up that responsibility solely. And so you see a situation where they said, okay, we have transformed the NNPC from just a corporation to a limited liability company in preparation for probably privatization later. And so we are stuck in between, the two divides. And I'm saying, when it comes to energy, particularly for an oil-producing country, the government must be in charge. But this is not by any means suggesting a monopoly by government. No, side by side, private sector. I say this because energy is a matter of national security. And because of this issue of subsidy you raise, government must, as a matter of necessity, subsidize energy at all times. Or rather, when required. If the prices are low by market forces, then you don't need to subsidize. As was the case during COVID. I mean, when oil production fell globally and crude oil price, the price of crude oil crashed as low as $10 per barrel, that was only for subsidy because the end product was going to be very, 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 very cheap and affordable. But government must always have that infrastructure, maintain that investment infrastructure in this important sector, cutting across all sectors of energy, electricity inclusive, so that where it is required, as part of government responsibility to the citizens, it will come in to make sure that there's availability and there is affordability. As a matter of fact, NNPC has the mandate for energy security. And that is why the GCEO now of NNPC is saying, look, we are subsidizing because of our mandate for energy security. We cannot afford to allow the prices to spiral out of control. What we are saying is that subsidy regime itself has some noticeable flaws that has to be corrected by way of tackling the inherent inefficiencies in government, but not the subsidy itself. Again, the focus should change from subsidy on importation to why are we even importing in the first place? Why are we importing? So it is a failure of government that it cannot fix its own refineries since 1999. It is not something that we should glamorize. And let me say this, when you want to privatize a company, you can't privatize a moribund company like the NNPC. There will be no serious investor to come in and buy it. You must run a state-owned enterprise to an appreciable level of efficiency and profitability before you can attract investment by way of privatization. And that was the case of Saudi Aramco that I was talking about. It's a state-owned enterprise, but in 2018 or thereabout, it divested only 1.5%. 1.5% of its shares and quoted it publicly on the domestic exchange. It attracted a market capitalization of $2 trillion within 48 hours. Because people know that this is a profitable entity that one can comfortably invest in. It has a revenue of over $300 billion annually, while we are making losses here. And it is operated by the state. We need to reform government.
Okay.
For a very long time, we've run away from the responsibility of reforming government, reforming the public sector, without which nothing can work in any country. So the focus should be reforming the public sector enough to take up certain responsibilities that only a government, particularly in a developing country, can undertake, which is energy security.
Okay, now the government actually seems to be, taking some measures to, end the fuel scarcity or make sure that, there's availability of fuel, because in October, the federal government raised the number of trucks coming into Abuja per se, but we didn't see an end to the scarcity. So where is the actual problem? Is it with the marketers or is it with the fueling stations? Because a lot of people seem to think that these fueling stations are hoarding fuel.
They may be hoarding fuel, I don't know, I can't speak for them. But you see, this is the problem with uncertainty in a market that has no guarantees anywhere. Now, the government is battling what they call subsidy. So when somebody buys a product and is unaware whether the government will continue the subsidy regime even by the next day, he may want to halt to see the new policy come out of government. And so it creates a disruption in the supply of this very important product to Nigerians. But the most important thing is Nigeria used to have a network of pipelines linking refineries to depots and to flow stations across the country. It was put in place as far back as 1978 when our current president was Minister of Petroleum under the administration of General Olusegun Obasanjo. So what happened to those network of pipelines that distributed products across the country, that linked crude oil from Escravos in Warri as far as the Kaduna refinery? What has happened to this? Why didn't we improve on them since the time it was put in place? Why did you allow them to degenerate? So what are we doing to revamp this massive network of pipelines and improve and expand them? We need to go through the hard way. We need to go back to how petroleum products are trucked all over the country or transported through pipelines mainly. From refineries. You see, we need more refineries.
But there's a current fight against, oil theft right now.
Yes, well, of course, that was affecting our export capabilities. Because of oil theft, we are not able to meet OPEC quotas. at a time that there was an oil boom. We couldn't meet it. So it was like double jeopardy for Nigeria. We were not able to maximize the advantages, unfortunate advantage that the Russia-Ukraine war threw at us by making more money from our own God-given commodity. And at the same time, because of the increase in prices that all that should affect us more money, we are not spending even more to subsidize the importation of this same product simply because we cannot refine this thing at home. And it doesn't take rocket science to refine petroleum at home. It simply takes the seriousness of government. But like I said earlier in my presentation, this will no longer be the responsibility of government alone, federal government alone. State governments, and this is a question we've not had before, a state like Rivers State should be able to have put in place at least one refinery that will earn its money. It's not charity. If you have a refinery today to actually substitute importation of petroleum to the tune of almost 19 billion liters per annum, do you know how much revenue will go to some of those states in addition to what they're getting from other ventures? So you begin to wonder, how come none of these states thought it wise to float special purpose vehicles to maximize and convert their hydrocarbon potentials into finished products, make money, and help guarantee Nigeria's energy security? It's something we need to have a conversation about. States must begin to set up state-owned enterprises. It's something we can no longer run away from. It is the trend in the world. Nobody should deceive anybody. Countries like Norway, countries like France, countries like Finland have state-owned enterprises in energy, in the energy sector. If you look at Russia today, Russia is fighting a war, yet the adverse effects of the disruption its own war is causing is not felt at all because the government of Russia is in charge of its energy sector through Gazprom. It's a state-owned enterprise. In fact, Ukraine, that is under bombardment, had electricity, and I was expecting electricity until their facilities were targeted by Russian airstrikes recently, because the state, the government of Ukraine, is involved in the means of production of energy. If you look at France wasn't suffering so much from energy crisis as for this war because it has a state-owned enterprise that's providing power for its citizens at a subsidized rate. And what I'm saying is challenging. Anybody who thinks I'm giving wrong information should please come to this place and challenge the statistics or this information I'm giving out. And this is why UK, which privatized its own energy value chain in the 80s under Thatcher, suffers so much because private sector cannot guarantee you energy security. They can only make products available to you. They cannot make it affordable for you. Only government can do that. That is why the UK Labour Party today has brought out a new manifesto that says we are going to restart state-owned enterprises in the UK to provide energy security for our citizens. And they are ahead of the Conservatives by 30% at the public opinion polls.
Okay.
So we need to have a rethink of our political economy in Nigeria. It's something we need to rethink. You can no longer excuse state out of means of production. You cannot abdicate that responsibility to anybody. It's nobody's responsibility. That is why diesel was deregulated. It was available all these years. That's the only thing that person can do for you. Availability. Affordability is another ball game. Today, even if you pay all the subsidies, the fact that diesel, the cost of diesel is high, is going to disrupt the supply chains in PMS. Because again, it's not under the control of anybody. It is a private sector driven activity.
Okay, now talking about private sector, the Dangote refinery is set to, commence operations soon. Do you think that the operation of that refinery is going to have an influence on subsidy in some way?
It's ordinarily it should have, because if it can meet up with the domestic consumption need, it means some of the issues of foreign exchange differentials, landing costs, haulage, and all of that might be mitigated a little bit. But this is where it gets tricky. That means we have to sell crude to Dangote first in naira, not in dollars. And I think it's a good policy to do that. Thankfully, the government of Nigeria has acquired a 20% stake in Dangote refinery, which is very commendable. Meaning it can sit on the board and somewhat convert its own revenue or its own dividends into some form of subsidy where it is required. Subsidy is not something you pay every day. No, definitely not. But where it is necessary. You see, you must have a strategic planning for energy security. That is, there is a threshold you must not allow price of energy to go beyond. So when it's about to go beyond that, certain factors, you must convert government assets to bring it down wherever you can. in order to stabilize the economy. So Dangote ordinarily would just refine petrol and sell to it, it will be available. But affordability is the problem. So to ensure affordability, government may have to consider selling crude to Dangote in Naira and probably have certain arrangements with him on local refining, even if it means selling crude, not just in Naira, but at a discounted rate for the purpose of local consumption. It's something that can be considered. And I can assure you that for any reason, if Dangote is to sell refined petroleum at a price that the government considers too high for citizens, it behoves on government to take up the burden of additional costs by paying Dangote to subsidize us. Subsidy is a permanent feature in energy security. So I don't want us to start having arguments about whether subsidy is good or evil or not. No, it is a permanent feature. The only thing is administer it with efficiency, with transparency, not with corruption. But it's a permanent feature. It must be there. If you need to, you may have to subsidize Dangote products for Nigerians to consume, if you need to. So it's something that we cannot even talk about enough.
All right.
So the solution is government becoming very serious about energy security.
Okay, well, the NNPCL has actually said that Nigeria's fuel consumption will decline when there is no incentive for excess use. Can you tell us your take on the issue of our current consumption level put at 66 million liters per day?
That's another thing that is quite debatable, and that is why you cannot actually track consumption when you are importing. Importation is fluid. And let me tell you something, NNPC is not the only one importing. NNPC is actually coordinating importation by private companies, even though it claims to be the sole importer. The other time that there was contamination in the system, NNPC came out to point fingers at the particular company that were responsible for the importation of such products that were contaminated, meaning that they are only coordinating importation of PMS per se, not that they are the ones actually doing the importation. So what this tells you is that when you are importing products, it is difficult to track in terms of quantitative and qualitative terms, because it's amorphous, it's haphazard. But when you have refineries in Nigeria that are producing, you can track what the crude oil input is and the refined petroleum output is. And you can now appropriately determine the right quantity of consumption per day in that country. At the current rate, it is still too high, because even though you have fuel scarcity, how can you still be claiming that you are consuming 68.8 million liters of petrol every single day, even during scarcity? So you can see part of the inefficiency in the so-called subsidy administration. This is a glaring one. But you cannot completely eliminate this until you begin to refine it. So the focus for NNPC, the lesson you should have learned from all of this crisis, is the need to start refining at home. And all political parties, the APC, the PDP, the Labour, the NF, all of them, we as Nigerians must set an agenda of energy security for them. I've listened to a number of presidential aspirants focusing only on subsidy, as if that was the only problem. That isn't the only problem. It's not even a problem. It is only the way it is administered that is the problem, which is the corruption issue. So while they are fighting corruption, please, subsidy is something that must be a defining feature in energy security, as is the practice all over the world. So the solution is local refining. You always have corruption when you're importing petrol. It's not something that you can really manage in return, because how do you track? I mean, I have a cargo on sea, something else is written on my bill of lading. How do you really reconcile these things? But if you have a facility that refines petrol, you know the amount of crude you've given to the facility. So you know what you're going to expect by way of output. It is easier to track. And now, that's the only time we can know the exact consumption in Nigeria. This figure is looking unrealistic and a little bit inflated. But again, we cannot speak in finality with that. It is for us to focus on local refining. It's not something we have an option in. We must do it. And I've also heard of the issue of smuggling across the border. That is failure of government. You cannot blame me as a citizen and impose high cost of petrol on me simply because we are able to police our borders and prevent subsidized products from going out. I should enjoy the privilege of being an oil-producing country. If Nigeria wasn't an oil-producing country, nobody would have this conversation, because we don't produce oil. So we're not expecting to have energy at certain kind of level. We don't produce it. But a Japanese cannot buy car at the same rate, Toyota car or Honda or any of their products, at the same rate I buy it in Nigeria. It's not possible, because it is produced in this country.
Well, unfortunately, we have to end the discussion here. Time is not on our side, and we have to go. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for